Hi, I'm Amy Werdenberg. I was able to personally interview three sources: a father and a son who immigrated from Argentina in the 1960s, and a man who was a refugee from Cambodia in the 1970s. These three men graciously revealed some very personal details, and so I have changed their names for the sake of privacy. The other two sources I found online. One is a collection of letters from an Irish family in the 1840s, and the other is the diary of a German man who immigrated with his family in 1849. I will be beginning with these earlier sources and continuing chronologically. The Curtis family letters were written by members on both sides of the Atlantic from 1845 to 1851. Because they were written for family and not for publication, they contain the charming nuances of personal correspondence, but I was still able to glean some valuable information. First of all, I have to consider the time period. These were written during the devastation of the Irish potato famine. In 1845, Hannah Curtis, who is in Ireland, writes to her brother John in America, and she writes of the 2 acres of potatoes they were supposed to have. None of them turned out, and she asks her brother to please send money to the rest of the family still in Ireland. Later letters speak of the starvation and devastation as the famine continues. And then as the letters progress, you can see that more and more of the family makes the journey to Pennsylvania, where they're able to farm successfully. So this is definitely an example of a push factor from the homeland to the United States. The Diary of Michael Friedrich Radke portrays the journey of one man and his family from Prussia, which is now Germany, to Pittsburgh and then later to Indiana in 1849. It explains their reasons for coming. It details a little bit about the journey on the ship, including the weather and the sights. And then it tells about their life once they arrived. The diary actually begins with his retelling of his childhood, his birth, his story as he's heard it. And then it continues all the way on up until 1851, which is 2 years after his family's arrival in the United States. Radke wrote, quote, "It was my desire to bring my children, while they were still with me and not in different places, to a place where they could find work and bread, as long as they would work hard and be frugal, where each of them could prepare for a happy and calm future," unquote. He wrote of the extreme differences between the rich and the poor in Prussia, and how the poor just grew poorer, and he did not want his children to grow up and live in constant poverty. When they arrived in the United States, he got a job in a steel mill in Pittsburgh, but after about a year, he hadn't been able to save any money, and so the family moved to Indiana, where they were able to farm. And quote, "And there I lived all the better and made better progress," unquote. These stories are rather classic examples of second wave immigration to this country. They came due to push and pull factors and were able to make comfortable homes for themselves and their families. The final three sources were from over a century later, and quite a bit changed during this period, both politically and legally, with the Civil War, both World Wars, and then especially the Quota Acts of the 1920s. Friedrich and his wife immigrated to New York City from Argentina in the 1960s in order to give their children a better life. Though the entire family was born in Argentina, both Friedrich's and Lily's parents came there from Europe, namely Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. Friedrich explained that they had a successful, happy life. They were pretty well off in Argentina. They had a business with 4 employees. They had a car, they had a washing machine, and other amenities, but that they just wanted more for their family. Friedrich applied for the visa. It took 1 year to get the visa, and they had to have $1,000 in an American bank. And then he worked his way over here first on a freighter in 1963, and then the family arrived later on February 1st, 1964. Once they were here, it was a 5-year process, including a literacy test, in order to become citizens. I asked if he felt that he had lived the classic American dream, and he responded with a resounding yes. He arrived with little money, but didn't know anyone or have a job lined up, and he was able to retire just 20 years later, and he and his wife have traveled the world extensively ever since. The account of Alexander, the son, was also positive, but he relayed more information about what life was like for the kids once the family arrived. He especially focused on life in high school and the fights and the student police force, which he was a part of. I asked if he remembered any discrimination against him, but he said no. Quote, "I look white, and I learned English at such a young age that I spoke without an accent. So to look at me or to listen to me, you wouldn't necessarily know that I wasn't born here," unquote. He told me that his school was a specialty school and there was an entrance exam and quotas for admissions. He estimated it was about 40% white, 40% black, and 20% other ethnic minorities. So then I asked him if he was considered white or an ethnic minority, having been born in Argentina but with family from Europe. And he said, quote, "I'm really not sure. You know, we considered ourselves American, but I think we were smart enough to check the minority box when it came to admissions forms and scholarships because we knew it might benefit us," unquote. He too felt that he had lived the American dream, having worked hard, raised a good family, and done well financially. He said this dream is still possible for those willing to work hard, but that admission into this country is not as easy as it used to be. The Hart-Celler Act, passed in 1965, did away with race quotas, but there's still a strict quota system in place and priorities given to reuniting families. The act reserved only about 10,000 visas annually for refugees, although the president is able to intervene if it's considered necessary. Andrew Heng and his family were refugees from Cambodia, fleeing the communist regime of the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s. They traveled first to Thailand, where they lived in camps for 3 years awaiting processing of paperwork before they could immigrate to the United States. In 1978, they were sponsored by a Catholic charity and flew to Houston, Texas in the fall when Andrew was 8 years old. He said that he had uncles and aunts who were sponsored by other charities, and thus they ended up in other parts of the country. He said that in his community and in his school, there were many other refugees, but he still endured a significant amount of discrimination and bullying. He told me that the first week he was here, he was sitting on the porch, and a kid threw a rock at his head, splitting it open and requiring 8 stitches. He continued to be picked on a lot until about 3rd or 4th grade. Andrew became a naturalized citizen in high school. He told me that he was the one who organized the paperwork for the rest of his family. Andrew and his father traveled back to Cambodia and Thailand together in 2003, and they were able to visit some of the places where they had once lived. He said that he felt he had been able to live the American dream, even though it was not by choice that he and his family had arrived here. He also explained that it was easier for his generation than for his father's, that the older refugees had a more difficult time settling in and adjusting to life in America. While the government's policies regarding refugee immigration have definitely improved since the European Jews were facing Hitler's Nazi Germany, it's still not a simple process to welcome those in need. According to Tichenor, the United States rescued more than 130,000 Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians when Saigon fell in 1975. And by the late 1970s, Carter invoked parole powers annually to help Indochinese refugees, unquote. Which is good, but what does that mean for today? The United States is often under pressure to welcome in and embrace those in need, such as the current crisis in Syria. Over the course of the semester, I've come to the understanding that American immigration policy generally adjusts to whatever the current population feels will benefit them the most. So at times, immigrants were welcomed, even encouraged and motivated to come, like with the Homestead Act of 1862. During other times, the gates are all but closed completely. The current policy seems to be fairly reasonable, but there's still a massive influx of illegal immigration, and debate continues as to what is to be done. I feel that the United States is not currently the open, welcoming nation that is often portrayed, but has rather a fluctuating policy regarding immigrants, and this will be the primary argument of my paper. Thank you.